George Orwell's 1984 stands as one of the most popular and enduring depictions of a dystopian future. Language is controlled. People are forced to use newspeak. Words are removed from people's vocabulary entirely. New words are added to avoid directly addressing topics that may challenge the ruling party or ideology. Taking away their language takes away their ability to articulate concepts which may be subversive. It's taken over the collective imagination in many ways, and has an enduring effect on how we discuss politics. It's not uncommon for political factions to try to enforce language control at some level, such that the discussions around certain topics are always framed in a way that's consistent with their worldview. This is often paired with the charge that you're a bad person for not accepting their framing. In political punditry, you've probably heard somebody accusing others or being accused of trying to use or enforce newspeak. This was the term coined by George Orwell to describe his in-universe language. This language was constructed as a parody, a critique on how language control was enforced, particularly in the Soviet Union. When someone uses this term, they're implying that somebody is trying to control or enforce how we use our language, specifically to aid their ideological ends, rather than some purely altruistic reason. Making certain words forbidden, for example, changing the definitions of existing words. This type of behavior has a few names nowadays. People might call it political correctness, for example. Now imagine this society managed to survive and was in power for thousands of years. One where not only is the language controlled, but you aren't allowed to say anything at all that isn't part of the specific list of slogans created by the ruling party. No other words even exist in the language. A society of absolute slaves. This is Big Brother taken to its logical ends. This is the society of the Ascians, presented in The Book of the New Sun by Gene Wolfe. I'll do a quick explanation of the lore because it's necessary context here. It's a sci-fi fantasy book. Science fantasy. It's one of those novels where many aspects of the world are very ambiguous. It's presented like a medieval fantasy, with many aspects that appear to be magic, but also several points where it seems to use sci-fi technology. It's set on a far future Earth in the dying Earth genre. The protagonist Severian is from the Commonwealth, an authoritarian kingdom led by an autarch. Just like Joe Brandon's America. Am I right, fellas? The Commonwealth is at war with the Ascians, who are our subjects here. The Ascians are also an authoritarian society. They're from the north, where all individuality has been erased. The protagonist, Severian, has some limited interactions with Ascians, where we learn about their society. For example, they are apparently led by a council, who have no names besides the Group of 17, who act as judges and councillors and are presented within their society as perfectly just and wise. Their language is rigidly controlled under an ideology known as correct thought, even more so than newspeak from 1984. In the Ascian society, one can only speak in pre-approved party slogans. Words outside of those sentences do not even exist within their language. They've been eliminated. They are not allowed in their language to even create new sentences. It is absolute language control, like Ingsoc taken to its most extreme possibility. They speak in lines like the following. One is strong, another beautiful, a third a cunning artificer. Which is best? He who serves the populace. Or alternatively, as a good child to its mother, so is the citizen to the Group of 17. And, as it turns out, the Group of 17 quite possibly don't even exist. They're actually ruled over by impossibly powerful Lovecraftian aliens. They are said to be enslaved by Erebus. Erebus and Abaya being the huge and powerful aliens buried within the earth. The reason they're at war with the Commonwealth? Because, well, they already actually have the power to destroy the world. But they don't want to. They want to enslave everyone in the Commonwealth for some reason. They're aliens. They have some nefarious ends that are mysterious. It's depicted as an impossibly brutal society. The autarch of the Commonwealth, describing them, says, they wish the race to become a single individual, the same, duplicated to the end of number. Their army is also described. 100,000 soldiers, shoulder to shoulder. All that rigidity, all that strength, melted into a kind of horror. There were old people and children in the infantry files, and some who seemed idiots. Nearly all had the mad, famished faces I'd seen the day before. Did you see one kill himself? They are not permitted arms until they are ready to engage us, and so many take advantage of the opportunity. Now, Gene Wolfe was a veteran of the Korean War and thus had first-hand experience with communists. In this society, it does seem to echo communist societies, like Brandon's America. In some ways, the prepared lines are not unlike the lines presented in the Little Red Book of Mao Zedong quotations. In fact, Chinese education focuses strongly on rote memorization. Chinese communism emphasized Mao Zedong thought. The analog with correct thought is pretty obvious. 大海航行靠舵手干革命靠毛泽东思想. That is, sailing the seas depends on the helmsman. Waging revolution depends on Mao Zedong thought. The preset Chinese phrase seems to very much be echoed by the prepared phrases of Ascian language. But it isn't just a parody of communism. On the immediate level, it appears to be a pretty in-your-face satire of communist societies, taken to some extreme version where people are controlled by evil Lovecraftian pagan gods. Where the group of 17 sit, their final justice is done. One of the interesting ideas that the concept of Newspeak explores is how language affects our thinking. Consider it. Where in our life does discussing things differently, using different language, affect how we think about said things? Humans pass away. Otherwise, they are killed. They can be murdered. A dog, however, is put down. If it attacks a human, it may be destroyed. A cow may be slaughtered, but it is not murdered. A human may also be slaughtered, but it has a completely different implication, for it lowers the human to the level of livestock. In terms of describing the callousness with which they were killed, it is clear that the language we use changes our attitudes. Or perhaps it simply changes in reflection of our attitudes. In this case, it propagates the generally agreed upon morality regarding the relationship between man and nature. But can language also affect cognition? Can it affect how we witness the world, how we remember and categorize the things that we perceive? And to what extent does it do those things? Now imagine going from simple word choices to a whole new language, with its own structure and vocabulary, with the complete history of a nation built into it. This is commonly referred to as the Sapir-Whorf hypothesis, although it wasn't actually a singular hypothesis agreed upon by both Sapir and Whorf. It is a linguistic concept that many readers have brought up in relation to both Ascian language and Newspeak. It's an interesting idea, and some data does indicate that language does indeed influence our cognition. It could explain cultural differences between, say, English, Germans, and French people. Now, the version of this concept presented in 1984's Newspeak is one of extremely strict, rigid, and intense control. Also, most importantly, it is effective. Now, there is of course some resistance. The protagonist, Winston, rebels against Big Brother. He feels trapped by the stifling authoritarian government and rages against it. But in the view we get of the broader society, it seems that the populace is largely obedient. Every language change by the Ministry of Truth is obeyed, and Newspeak isn't really subverted or altered in any way by its users. This does reflect a certain view of human nature. That is, it doesn't really exist. Humans are tabula rasa, a blank slate. There exist no innate ideas or inherent tendencies. Everything they believe about the world, the attitudes they hold, their morality and belief, their perception, is shaped by culture and can be shaped by the government. And in this case, more specifically, it is shaped by language. Now, Gene Wolfe was a member of the Catholic Church, and human nature is an essential element of Catholic doctrine. That humans have a fallen nature is central to Christianity. It's held that morality is written on our hearts by God. This idea is alluded to several times in the Bible. In Hebrews 8, "This is the covenant I will establish with the people of Israel after that time, declares the Lord. I will put my laws in their minds and write them on their hearts. I will be their God, and they will be my people." To believe in human nature is to say that humans have a nature, some essential tendencies, some higher nature, that they will always act in certain ways, regardless of social conditioning. It can also extend to innate knowledge and capabilities. Interestingly enough, some cunning linguists suggest that humans have some innate knowledge, innate capabilities related to language. It's certainly not uncommon to find some middle ground between these two views, that some tendencies are innate to human beings, but many things that appear to be inevitable as a part of human nature are actually cultural products and would change depending on conditions. The way things are is probably not the way things are always going to be. Things that are common now, entrenched, may not always be so. The Ascian society is one which is significantly more oppressive in terms of its language control. It's literally ruled over by near omniscient alien creatures, and yet humanity somehow shines brighter. What do I mean by this? Well, the section of the book where we get the most exposure to Ascian language is when Severian is injured, in a bed in a medical facility. There are several patients there who each take a chapter telling their own story. Each story is experimental. They all utilize some interesting storytelling concept or unique symbolism to show the culture that the character came from. The one that matters here is the story that the Ascians tell. Also, they're all telling these stories to impress the nurse so that they can sleep with her. Yeah, this book's just kinda like that. The story that matters here, though, is the story that the Ascian tells. The nurse is able to understand and interpret Ascian. The nurse views Ascians as less than human. She helps them as she would help injured animals. But she comes across them so often that she started to interpret their language. In times past, loyalty to the cause of the populace was to be found everywhere. The will of the group of 17 was the will of everyone. This line is interpreted by the nurse as once upon a time. You see, they can only use pre-approved phrases, but given context and associated word choices, it is possible to interpret this secondary hidden meaning. Let no one be idle. If one is idle, let him band together with others who are idle too, and let them look for idle land. Let everyone they meet direct them. It is better to walk 1,000 leagues than to sit in the house of starvation. This is interpreted as, there was a remote farm worked in partnership by people who were not related. One is strong, another beautiful, a third a cunning artificer. Which is best? He who serves the populace. It's interpreted as, on this farm lived a good man. The whole story, thenceforth, is composed of Ascian phrases in much the same way. All of the phrases get interpreted by the nurse. Even given the limited tools at their disposal and their oppressive environment, the Ascians are still able to tell stories. Within the bounds of extremely harsh limitation, human nature will still find a way to express itself. Storytelling is a natural expression of humanity that cannot be destroyed, even with omniscient interdimensional demons controlling your society. Woolf's message is simple. Humans are not merely puppets to be controlled and directed. Humanity can survive in the most extreme of circumstances. What if I told you, however, that there was yet another level to this concept, yet another message that Woolf wanted to communicate? Think about the nurse interpreting the story being told by the Ascian. Stories exist within a context. They are usually best understood by those who have direct contact with the culture that the story was told in. An attempt must be made to interpret things through an accurate lens, and this involves context. For example, the context for the Ascian is that they live within an oppressive society that only allows them certain phrases. Without this context, it would be impossible to understand the story. Taken at face value, it would just appear as though he is praising the government, which is the outward appearance that the government wants to create. This concept obviously has broad-reaching implications for how we understand history and religion. Works must be interpreted to be correctly understood, and unlike art, there are correct and incorrect interpretations, or at least some that are more reasonable than others. There are obvious considerations. A Roman is likely to represent Rome's army as glorious, and their actions as justified. There will be cultural biases, but there are also many more types of biases. For example, the creator of a text may be deliberately obscurantist, that is, hiding the meaning of the text, perhaps because it is only intended for a very specific audience who will understand what is meant, because it is not intended for a mass audience. Or because of political repression, the actual meaning must be hidden. A great example is the Book of Revelation, written during the time of the Roman Empire, at a point when Christians were broadly persecuted. This is why it is broadly believed to use a lot of symbolic imagery, and most Christians in the modern day do not claim to know exactly what was intended by every passage in the text. The Ascian language must similarly be understood within its context. We need to understand context to be able to comprehend the meaning of the text, especially for ancient texts. To illustrate this, I'll again remind you that Gene Wolfe was a Catholic. In the Catholic Church, priests are referred to with the title of Father. Protestants, however, usually use the term pastor to refer to their leadership, and they typically bear titles such as Reverend or Minister. Matthew 23 is often cited to support this. Do not call anyone on earth your father, for one is your Father, he who is in heaven. At a surface level, this seems like a pretty obvious slam dunk. So what is the Catholic defense for referring to their leadership with the title of Father? The Church would say that the intent of the passage was not to forbid the use of the word father. After all, can a child not call their own parent father? They would say it was hyperbole. Jesus was trying to communicate the fact that people shouldn't use their religious beliefs as a method to obtain power and esteem above others, and you shouldn't elevate others to that position using their religious beliefs. In the same chapter, Christ is criticizing the Pharisees who love the best places at feasts, the best seats in the synagogues, greetings in the marketplaces, and to be called by men, Rabbi, Rabbi. If you follow the logic of not referring to others as Father, you also cannot refer to others as teacher, for the verse also says, "And do not be called teachers, for one is your teacher, the Christ." There are also several times where Paul refers to the apostles as his children, and places himself in the position of father, as a spiritual father. So the Church would say simply, read the context. What it says directly is not necessarily what was intended. Patristics is also a significant topic in Christianity. This is the study of the Church Fathers. They are essentially the early significant Christian writers. The Church Fathers are studied because it is invaluable to know how the Bible was interpreted by those closer to the events, those who spoke the same languages natively, those who had more cultural context. The Catholic Church appeals to the authority of Scripture, tradition, history, the Church Fathers, and to early Christians. Conversely, Protestants adhere to sola scriptura, which entails that only the word of the Bible has authority. In a sense, that kind of lays the groundwork for the removal of the text, the Bible, from its context. It's possible that Gene Wolfe intended this critique. Perhaps this critique was more generally referring to all historical studies. Or his critique was pointed at a completely different specific subject. Or perhaps this is what I'm reading out of it. I could seek further context on this by looking at interviews, but I won't do that. Instead, I'll just rely on the authority of the text on its own merits. What I love about this chapter in the book is how multi-layered it is. This is really just one chapter, and the whole book really is this dense. If you're interested in ideas like multiple timelines, quantum immortality, messianic prophecies, eternal recurrence, and unreliable narrators, you may get a lot out of the Book of the New Sun. Gene Wolfe died 5 years ago now, but his work lives on. I strongly believe that he has an enduring legacy, which will only grow over the next 100 years. I recommend Book of the New Sun. It grows so much richer each time you read it. I do have yet to complete every book in the solar cycle. Please like and subscribe. I hope you all enjoyed the video. Thank you all very much for watching. Goodbye. I would like to thank my patrons, Mixtab, Maritime Steak 85, Will Matty, Lazy the Crazy, Glorious Bees, Delirious Fool, and Top Keck Red for helping make this happen. The support I've gotten from these guys has been especially helpful lately after I got demonetized for a while, so I thank you all so much for supporting me. It really means a lot. Thank you and goodbye.